of those who have died of an overdose. There are many things funeral service professionals must consider when serving these families. Today, we will learn about this crisis and how it affects the lives and our businesses. At this time, I'd like to have Dutch Nye come forward. I think many of you know that he was newly elected as an at-large representative to the board of NFDA, and he will also be serving as the moderator for the panel presentation this morning. Dutch is going to come forward and introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Ashley. Good morning, I'm Dutch Nye, and it is my pleasure to serve as the moderator this morning. This morning we'll examine various aspects of the opioid epidemic facing our country. This issue has many applications for funeral professionals. We have 4 panelists who will share their experiences and expertise, what they know and what they've seen. You'll hear an overview of the crisis from Dr. Stephen Bensten, the Chief Medical Officer of Beacon Health Options, and a member of the clinical faculty of Department of Psychiatry at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has achieved numerous academic appointments, is a past president of the North Carolina Psychiatric Association, has served on various medical boards and committees, and Beacon Health Options is the administrator for the new NFDA Work/Life Resource Program. We are also pleased to have panelist Phil Parrish join us. Phil is an accomplished educator, a retired high school principal, an assistant superintendent who lost 2 adult children to opioid overdoses. He is actively engaged in the Waukesha County, Wisconsin Heroin Task Force in the community education efforts, and serves as a member of the leadership team concentrating on prevention. He is also involved in Elevate You, as a grant provider working with the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as numerous other coalitions. Phil will be a tough story to hear, but an important one for all of us. Our next panelist is Funeral Director Keith Walker, President of the Walker Funeral Homes in Toledo, Ohio. Keith's business includes 5 locations, a crematory, a cremation society serving the Toledo area. Walker Funeral Homes began with Help with Heroin campaign in January of 2016, beginning with billboard, TV, and radio ads. The purpose was to raise awareness of the scope of the opioid problem in the community and reduce the stigmatism associated in the community and help reduce the stigmatism associated with it so people could communicate and get help. The firm also launched a website, helpwithheroin.com, where users, employers, family members, and friends can directly access agencies that can help them. Keith is a board member of the Hospice of Northwest Ohio, the Zemp Center, and the Toledo Area Small Business Association. He is a member of the Rotary Club of Savannah, numerous chambers of commerce, and active at McCord Road Christian Church. Our final panelist is Funeral Director Charles Castiglia. He is a second-generation licensed funeral director in the state of New York with a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Management from Houghton College and a Master's of Science degree in Strategic Leadership from Robert Wesleyan College. Charles is the president of the Lakeside Memorial Funeral Home in Hamburg, New York, and is an active member in the Erie County Opioid Epidemic Task Force. Charles serves as the president of the International Order of the Golden Rule and is a past recipient of their Golden Exemplary Service Award, and his firm has also won numerous NFDA Pursuit of Excellence Awards. After we hear from each of our panelists, they will take their questions. And we have 2 microphones set up, so when we do take the questions, to step forward to them. At this time, I'd like to ask Dr. Bensten to start us off.
Thanks so much, Dutch. Can you hear me okay? It's a pleasure being here. I have mixed feelings about being here because I think, I tell my colleagues that this is really defining an epidemic where you need to reach out and have a physician talk to you about a medical condition, which is the opiate use condition that's really running rampant through this country. Our pleasure being here. I'm sorry I missed the dress code. I think I missed that email from you guys.
Made me worse.
They made you worse. I am an addiction psychiatrist. I'm also been a Suboxone medication-assisted treatment provider for opiate use conditions before I joined Beacon. I've been with Beacon Health Options for about 6 years now. So I come from a clinical background before I joined Beacon, and really kind of saw this epidemic kind of rising over the past 20, 30 years. Just for information about Beacon, Beacon is we're a health and wellness company. Our mission is really to have members achieve their best potential. We provide health care coverage for behavioral health conditions only, substance use, and mental health conditions, where we have numerous EAP clients, and I'm glad to see that you're on board. As of a few months ago, we have over 300 EAP clients. We also deliver substance use and mental health utilization. So our penetration is over 50 states and the United Kingdom. So we have a broad kind of knowledge of the opiate use condition through trying to link people into treatment, as well as providing EAP services for families and those affected by the condition. I think it's important. I'm just going to provide a brief history of the heroin use in this country, because I feel like it's really segmented to what's going on now, and then treatment strategies, and also kind of review employee assistance programs as a resource, which I think is very frequently overlooked. This opiate use epidemic, in my opinion, is really a heroin epidemic. You can see our national data on overdoses on heroin and the incredible spike that we've seen over the past 10 to 20 years. Heroin itself has a long history in this country. It was really, and I really feel what's going on now kind of parallels kind of what happened historically in this country around the turn of the century. In the 1850s, opiates were brought over mainly by Chinese immigrants and some, and also from Europe. And there was an opiate kind of issue that really gripped this country in the 50s and 1850s, and during the Civil War, we saw the development of morphine as a way to treat pain conditions. And what happened was, after around the turn of the century, that morphine was really used as a safe alternative to treat conditions. One of the issues with opiates in general is that they actually decrease gastric motility. So there was marketing of this medicine for decreasing kind of diarrhea and diarrheal conditions. And also, there was very little out there for physicians to deliver for symptomatic treatments around the turn of the century. So what we saw is that the use of heroin opiates really started going up incredibly in the early 1900s in this country. And it was marketed as a cure-all, from TB to cancer, withdrawal, and even old age. And it became over-the-counter. And there were many concoctions being sold in the country to push this product. And you can see some early ads in the 1990s, and I'm comparing this to what happened in the 1990s, because that's really where this epidemic really started. This epidemic that we're dealing with now really has been going on for 20 to 30 years, and finally is reaching the point where it's achieved public awareness. So you see in the 90s, you had Bayer advertising heroin, aspirin for conditions. You know, if you have a cough, use heroin. And actually, when heroin was synthesized, it was delivered IV, and they felt it was not addictive because it wasn't a pill somebody took. And it was marketed as kind of being safe. And you know, even got its word. In Germany, when it was developed, the people at Bayer that took it, when they took it, they felt heroic. That's how the word heroin came out. It was a derivative of the word heroic. It made people feel very good. And if you're suffering from a painful condition that has very little somatic medical treatments, this was really used to treat numerous medical conditions. You also saw it using in children and advertising. And then we see in the 90s, you have a very similar thing. In the 90s, pain became what's called a fifth vital sign. There was push kind of in the medical community that people were under-treating pain. That pain was a right to be treated, and pain should be treated if a person tells you they have pain. And that was really pushed in the medical community, pushed through a lot of marketing, and also pushed kind of in society. Heroin chic, I think, is really important to understand that all of a sudden we had marketing to kind of middle class, upper class people, kind of this heroin lifestyle, heroin look was kind of becoming accepted kind of within our society in the 1990s. And none of that had occurred before that, because really opiate use was pretty flat up until kind of 20, 30 years ago, from the late 20s to now. And the issue you had in the 1990s was that finally there became an issue that the opiate use increased 500% in this country. Heroin was made illegal, was a controlled drug, and doctors were told not to prescribe it. And there was a big transition where heroin and treatment of pain was to be avoided due to the fear of addiction and overdose. And that happened around 1925, and as I said, it's remained stable up until around the 1980s when we had those issues occur. So the foundations of the current crisis are pain being a fifth vital sign, which was pushed forward by the American Pain Society and also was established by the Joint Commission as a standard of care. So when the Joint Commission came to your hospital, if you were not treating pain aggressively, you were cited. And this became, and I did a lot of hospital work during this time, and this was something that was really at the forefront to make sure pain was treated adequately. How was it treated? It was treated exactly what the person reported. Doctors also were held, there was patient satisfaction surveys regarding the use of pain during that time that also pushed the use of pain. And providers didn't want to be inconvenienced by having to refill prescriptions, and a lot of times prescriptions were filled based on planned benefit, like your insurance covered a 30-day supply with one copay, so doctors were giving 30-day supplies of opiates when they probably weren't needed, just because of the health plan and the way the payment structure was structured around medications. In the mid-1990s, we saw an explosion of medical literature that supported opiates as safe and long-term, but these were very poorly controlled studies. A lot of these were just letters to the editor that were picked up. And this really was spurred by the release of OxyContin in 1995 by Purdue Pharma, which was marketed initially as a less addictive opiate, but it turned out, obviously, as you know, to be a more powerfully addictive opiate. It was long-acting, but could easily be crushed, snorted, and the use of OxyContin really exploded the penetration of opiates into the insured population. Because I think, previously we really had opiate use kind of after the 1920s kind of pushed into the cities and urban areas, poor areas, but you saw through the prescription plans and who's being prescribed OxyContin are people with insurance, you all of a sudden saw this being pushed to all the populations in America. And there were over 20, it's hard to believe, but there were over 20,000 symposiums around this country from 96 to 2002 directed towards doctors to treat pain aggressively. And there was a condition called opiophobia that physicians had, and they needed to be educated that opiates were not harmful. So from this, you kind of had, unfortunately, you had kind of the upbringing of pain mills that occurred, and the use of opiates grew pretty thick, substantially. And in society, we saw in the 1970s, we saw widespread use of marijuana, acceptance of experimentation of LSD. After the Vietnam War, heroin use was kind of brought back by the servicemen. So we kind of saw, also in society, kind of the glamorization of heroin through some celebrity use and through styles and through culture. So we had that kind of going in conjunction with this. And here's the result. You can see this graph here of the opiate consumption in America. On the bottom is the opiate, you can't see this very well, it's the opiate consumption in Europe over the same time period. And it's beginning around the late 80s to 94, you see this incredible spike that's continued. The concern now is that, and I'll address this later, is the decrease. We're actually seeing decreased prescribing now. And mainly that is due to legislative mandates and increased awareness of the dangers of opiate use. So physicians are actually decreasing prescribing, which is causing another problem that I'll address. And here you can see the increased mortality by states. This is CDC data. And the really dark red states here are showing a 20% or greater increase in mortality of opiate use from 2013 to 15. So these are the states that are really experiencing the crisis the worst, and even the medium red colors are about 10% growth. So what we're seeing is kind of an incredible kind of swath of increased mortality with opiate use, even though we're having decreased prescribing over the past couple of years. And the number of deaths for opiate use condition has increased about 300% since 2002. And now it is the leading cause of death. It's exceeded the cause of deaths of accidental deaths in the United States for the first time. And roughly there are about 90 to 100 people each day that are dying of opiate use. One of the key issues about the opiate prescription issue is that 75% of all people that misuse opiate prescriptions were not prescribed the drug. So there is kind of sometimes a myth that if whoever is getting the opiate is the drug user. Usually it's the diversion. And what we found was, a lot of the diversion occurred with young adolescents who actually thought that taking pills in grandma's medicine cabinet was safer than buying something on the street. So we had a ton of kind of prescriptions laying around that actually were not being used by people who are being prescribed that actually were being diverted. And also you had prescriptions that were being diverted and being sold. So I think, and that's been some of the controversy in managing kind of pain with opiates. Is the issue kind of opiates are bad and should be treated for pain? There's really no good long-term studies in that. But the real issue is we have a ton of opiates sitting out there that aren't being used, that are being diverted, or if are being prescribed, are being sold and being diverted and being moved into the drug market. So one of the key things we've been pushing is really safe disposal of medicines. People should be encouraged to dispose unused opiates. If you look in your medicine cabinet at home, throw away the opiates. If you had your tooth pulled 5 years ago and you've got like 20, 30 pills left, throw it away. And this is one of the medicines that actually you can flush in the toilet. The FDA does allow that. They say that is an acceptable use for opiates to flush in the toilet. And here is kind of, I think, one of the real stories that's going on now is that we're seeing the overdose deaths of the prescribed opiates. If you notice, it's starting to develop a flat line. And what we're seeing is that the overdose deaths of heroin and other synthetic drugs is showing a very dangerous spike. And if this spike continues, there's an estimate we could have 500,000 people a year dying of opiates in another 10 years. So there has to be we have to stop this kind of increase in heroin and synthetic opiate use in this country. And really the current challenge, and this is I think what is affecting you, is the use of carfentanil and fentanyl. And you can see that little touch of salt next to the penny is enough to cause a lethal overdose of carfentanil. So the amount used to cause an overdose is extremely small. Some people say that if you take a softball-sized carfentanil, that you probably could wipe out most of the country's population. But that's how toxic carfentanil is. Now, if you remember when there was the terrorist attack in Russia, where they aerosoled the theater and 80 people died, it was carfentanil that was sprayed. And what happened there was the rescue for Narcan, which is used to reverse kind of opiate use, they didn't have enough vials on hand, and a number of people died. So this is how potent this medicine is, and actually the government actually looked at this at one point as easily being weaponized. But this is what's starting to enter the market and starting to kill people. And you can see on the bottom, the vials, just the amount. This is a lethal dose amount that it would take for somebody to die if they took that. So you can see that the other issue too, when the carfentanil and fentanyl is used, there's a risk to you. I think there was a great brochure. I think you've all had. It's an excellent brochure that was put together regarding opioid use. I'm going to steal that, use that myself. I've been passing it around. It's really excellent, excellent. And in there, I think it really outlines kind of the risk that you have and what you need to do to take precautions. There are cases of FBI field agents who have gone on site to see an area where somebody overdosed, that touched something and have overdosed. So this is a real concern. You need to take appropriate precautions. As I said, I think your handout, your brochure is really excellent. Review that. Another thing I think everyone should have, and probably you should have on site, is a Narcan overdose reversal kit. There are prescription kits that can be administered, very self-administered and very simple. You just open them up. Here it kind of explains how you use it. The needle kind of goes in, it's injected, it's all automated. And that really works by putting a drug that binds the opiate receptors of the brain where the heroin or the opiate is binding, and then kicks it off, and then the respiratory depression disappears and people can start breathing again. Because the number one cause of death, opiate use, is stopping. There is really respiratory depression and anoxia. And then there are Narcan sprays. I don't know if you've seen these, but these are kits that people make because they're very inexpensive. The prescription medicine is still, unfortunately, very expensive. There is some push to get the cost down. And these are very easily administered through the nose, where you spray Narcan through the nostril. In conjunction with our current efforts on opioid crisis, the Surgeon General put out a report last year for the first time ever addressing substance use in America, and targeted at length the opiate use problem, and really pushed education of providers to treat pain safely and effectively and screen patients for opioid use disorders, and also talk to addiction as a chronic illness, not a moral failing. And that's one thing I think you probably see the stigma kind of where you are every day, is that people still are not aware that this is not something somebody chooses to do. If everybody in this room was given heroin, 15% of you probably couldn't stop. It's not everybody that can't stop, but there are some people where their brain is wired. We know a lot about brain chemistry. We know about reward systems involving dopamine. That for some people, and sometimes it's inherited, and we're seeing that in a number of families, especially with young kids. But also, you don't know right now. There might be genetic tests that can predict it in the future. Hopefully, there might even be vaccines that can prevent heroin from being high, getting a high with heroin in the future. But right now, we really don't know who's at risk. So the issue is to really screen people and to really be judicious about what's prescribed. And we're really working hard to push evidence-based clinical treatment. One of the issues here is that from a societal background, we've had treatments for alcohol use conditions in our facilities. When this opioid crisis happened, facilities really were not up to speed with what is effective, appropriate treatment for opioid use conditions. So there's been a shift kind of in the provision of substance use services in this country from prioritizing opioid use treatment versus alcohol-related treatment. And a lot of people with opioid use conditions did not fit well in alcohol treatment facilities. So we're really moving to push medication-assisted treatment as part of the treatment program. And if you don't know what that is for some it's a substitution therapy, or a medicine like buprenorphine, which is an opiate, and actually taken alone, you cannot overdose with it. There's maybe 1 or 2 cases reported. Typically, you have to take another drug with it to overdose, so it's very safe. It has a ceiling that if you take too much, it starts working against itself. And it also blocks the use of other opiates from working. So we find that the desire to use of somebody who's addicted to opiates, because of the purity, because of the strength of the opiates, is incredibly high now. And that the cravings are decreased with use of medication treatment, but the medicine is not treatment itself. That allows the application of behavioral and societal and family kind of interventions to help improve somebody's life. So the key thing is it's not an answer in itself, but this is used to kind of allow people to engage in treatment to really move into recovery. And it requires a coordinated effort to combat the opioid epidemic. This is kind of how we're structured at Beacon. One of the key things we have now that we didn't have in the 1900s and 1920s is we are aligned now to provide treatment. Okay, I mean, when you look at when the heroin was deemed illegal in 1925, there wasn't even health coverage for substance use treatment. Prisons were built to put people that couldn't stop using. And to get treatment, some people actually went to prison because that's the only place they could get treatment. And people were voluntarily going to prison to stop using back in the 20s. Now we've had passage of Mental Health Parity Act, which substance use conditions are treated just the same as physical conditions. And the key thing now is really to move people into treatment to really prevent this crisis from growing further. And we are really about engaging people in treatment, but the key thing we see is that this is a chronic condition that people should be in long-term treatment. So we really feel kind of short-term, treatment away from home. Typically for the majority of people, it's not appropriate. What's needed is kind of community-based treatment involving families. And really, to be honest with you, to really solve this epidemic, there's going to have to be changes in the community. Because really this, I think, is a community-based problem, which I think other speakers will talk about here today too, but there's been a disintegration of local communities. And people don't know their neighbor, but they're able to text people all around the world and have conversations with people. It's like we've sort of lost this kind of community kind of support that's really needed. And I think you're in a role where you see that, and you hopefully can kind of enable kind of those connections to occur. And that's where EAP comes in. I really feel EAP is a grossly underutilized resource for opiate use conditions. The nice thing about EAP, if somebody's really ambivalent about getting help, EAP is not a medical service. There's no medical record. It's totally confidential. It's outside of the healthcare system. So people can access and talk to somebody without anybody knowing. And this is a great resource, I think, for your staff that maybe are struggling with things they're seeing. But also, I think it's a resource for the people you're serving. If they have insurance, tell them to call their EAP, especially if they're reluctant to kind of get help. Because the EAP is short-term, it's focused on providing solutions and focused on kind of providing community integration. So, I would encourage you to kind of promote that with your staff back at home. And if they're having any difficulties kind of coping with things that they're seeing, especially if they're reluctant to sometimes people are reluctant to see a therapist, talk to a therapist about it. EAP is kind of an assistance program. Okay? Like I said, it's not a medical treatment. Finally, I think it's real important that we kind of look at the language of substance users. We now don't call people addicts. We call people who have a substance use disorder. I think it's, you can see some of the words here that rather than clean and sober, we use the terms people are in recovery. And the terms of user addict, user junkie, crackhead, pill popper, tweaker, druggie, all these kind of pejorative terms we're really replacing with a person with a substance use disorder. So, you know, I think it's really important to kind of, and that's the real kind of silver lining out of this, I think, is that hopefully we can change kind of how we look at people that have substance use problems in this country and kind of move this as a condition that's openly talked about, especially openly talked about with families. And I mentioned EAP, but I think families need to have resources to go to when they see things happening. And I think too frequently families don't know where to turn. So I think the more we kind of open it up, like it's something just like any other medical problem, the more we're going to get acceptance of treatment. And it's just like in my mind, you know, 20, 30 years ago, depression, nobody talked about depression. I go places and some people feel like it's not even a stigma anymore. People talk about it very frequently. Hopefully we'll get there, we get to that point with the substance use conditions. Okay, thanks.
Good morning, my name is Phil Pears, and just for the record, this man closed the computer down, not me. So if it doesn't work for the next speaker, don't blame Phil. Just getting that out there. I did, thank you. Good morning, my name is Phil Pears. I'm also known as Dr. Phil. I'm the other Dr. Phil, if you don't know the difference. I have hair. I'm here to tell you a story today. It's about my son Matthew, who died of a heroin overdose on November 14th, 2015. 1 month and a few days away from his golden birthday. It's a story about my daughter, Alexandria, who also died from a heroin overdose this past Easter Sunday, April 16, 2017. Before I begin my story, I want to ask you a few questions, and I want you to remember the number 6. How many of you have either had a family member or extended family member involved with drugs? Drugs meaning any kind of drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, just a show of hands. Almost everyone. How many of you remember 911, the 9/11 date? How many of you know someone or heard about someone from a friend or coworker who died in the 9/11 attack? Almost a fourth. Interesting. What number did I ask you to remember? Oh, what a good crowd. We are all 6 or fewer people away from knowing someone who was involved with the 9/11 tragedies. We are all 6 or fewer people away from knowing someone who was involved with drugs. The problem is, no one wants to talk about it. Parents of drug abusers deny it. Their kids deny it. Schools look the other way and don't get involved. Pastors and priests don't get engaged. It's like we're surrounded by this lethal epidemic that is right in our own homes or backyards, and no one wants to start the conversation. It's like being a little kid again when we played hide and seek. Remember running away to hide, and when the person got too close, what did we do? We closed our eyes. Because if we couldn't see them, they couldn't see us. Remember? Or maybe I was just a dumb kid. Don't know. That's what I did. When a tragedy occurs like 9/11, we can tell anyone exactly where we were and what we were doing. On 9/11, I was driving home from my job in Kenosha, and I'll never forget, there wasn't a plane in the sky. They'd all been grounded in response to the attacks, and I'll never forget the silence. I know I have 2 more of my own 9/11 days that I will never forget. Where was I when my son started using drugs? I can't tell you. My wife had left me with 2 kids, ages 8 and 11, after 17 years of marriage. She left everything, and I was suddenly a single parent. Life became a struggle as a mom, dad. I took the kids to school every morning, and my neighbor helped me pick them up and watch them until I got home. Sometime between the divorce and his early teens, Matthew started using. As a sophomore in high school, he stopped participating in sports, football, wrestling, martial arts. He started hanging out with who I thought were pretty decent kids. Didn't know they were all smoking and drinking. In his junior year, he started missing school. His grades dropped, and as a senior, he was failing all of his subjects and ultimately dropped out of school. I took him to counseling, talked to school staff, talked to professional friends I had known for years. When he was arrested and incarcerated for petty theft, I thought that was the end of it. Unfortunately, it got worse. Matthew started stealing from me, money, my car, anything he could get his hands on, all the while getting deeper and deeper into the world of illicit drugs. Because there are laws protecting teenagers from being committed to a rehabilitation facility after age 14, at least in Wisconsin, I couldn't get him into treatment. After serving his last day in another jail for another theft and possession, he finally agreed to go to treatment as a condition of his release. My ex-wife and I put him on a plane to Texas for admission to a rehab center. Hallelujah. My son would be treated, hopefully successfully, and would return to being the Matthew I knew. Precocious, inquisitive, outgoing, friends to all, altar boy in my church, Boy Scout, athlete, kid I took muskie fishing, kid I taught how to ski, he became a snowboard instructor, valedictorian of his classes in his early years, 2, convicted felon, drug seller, user, thief, and manipulator. He returned to Milwaukee against my strong advice. I really wanted him to stay in Texas at the facility. He had learned to ride and train horses and was the son that had left me to enter another world, but he came back. In a few short months, he was immersed in his own world again, stealing, dealing, using, and spending time in jail. Plan B, leave Milwaukee, go to Colorado with one of his friends. Another rehab facility in Milwaukee, and off to Colorado he went. Started his own business, seemed to be thriving, and within a year, he was back in jail again. One of the Matthews buddies decided to bail him out after he had been in jail for the better part of a year. Upon his release, with his friend, overdosed and died. I got a call on my way home from work at 5:15 in the evening. My son was gone. That's the day time stood still for me. My daughter Alexandria was a different story. After the divorce, she asked if she could live with her mom in Madison. I had full custody, but it only seemed like the right thing to do for her. Sometime over the next 4 years, she also started using heroin. She finished high school and started college at the age of 17. Extremely precocious, intelligent beyond her years, planned to become a veterinarian and a therapist, combining her love for horses with a therapeutic ranch. Cheerleader, honor student, model, artist. Loved to be outdoors and fish with me, just like her brother. Strong-willed, in charge, outgoing, and involved with illicit drugs. She morphed from all of this to jail and rehab. She went through the routine twice, got pregnant while using, and gave birth to 2 boys. Aiden and Elliot were both born prematurely and spent their first 4 months in a neonatal intensive care unit. Aiden didn't make it. Elliot survived, born with cerebral palsy and other neurological issues. He is now 3 years old, living with her boyfriend's mother, Kathy, and her family. He has a regime of doctor's appointments, daycare, and therapy, and he's in a home where he is being loved beyond words. Kathy told me at Allie's funeral, when she put him to bed on Saturday night, Easter Sunday weekend, he told her, "Mommy came to play with me." Sunday morning, when she woke him up, he said, "Mommy came to say goodbye." Allie's death is being investigated as a possible homicide. The detective met with me and said the syringe she had been using was still almost full. She died before she hit the floor. They suspect fentanyl or carfentanil is the cause of death. Allie met with me the Wednesday before she overdosed, full of life and good spirits. She had just purchased a new pair of cowboy boots so she could start her job, working with horses on a therapy ranch. She was going to come over for Easter for the first time in years. Why she relapsed, I'll never know. I learned that addicts tend to reuse drugs at the same level of their addiction when they again have access to them. Because they have been completely detoxed, their systems cannot tolerate the injections at the same levels they were used to. With the introduction of these new drugs, fentanyl and carfentanil, which is an elephant tranquilizer 800 times more potent than heroin, and another new drug called White Death, these kids don't have a chance. Although paramedics were called for both Matthew and Allie, it was too late. Their lives were over. They both wanted to be cremated, thrown to the wind to be free, and they both got their wish. The little boxes I received held a few ashes. I wanted to scatter their memories, and scatter them I did. I don't have any more answers today than I did a few years ago. I have questions, many questions. I do know, since I got involved with the Waukesha County Heroin Task Force, that good people, very good people, are involved with dedicating their time, talent, and resources to help prevent and combat this epidemic. I know children every day, hundreds of children, die from diseases, accidents, serving our country in battle, acts of violence, child abuse, you name it. I know in my heart the finality of burying a loved one, especially your own child. I am forever grateful to all of you, the professionals in the funeral homes, who allowed my beloved children to celebrate their lives with dignity. I thank you for that. If you didn't know anyone who lost a child before this presentation, now you do. And you are no longer 6 or more people away from knowing someone. If you believe this problem will go away on its own, it won't. If you don't think this can happen to you or someone in your family, you are wrong. If you believe this really is someone else's problem, it's not. If you do nothing else at all, please start the conversation. Addiction is not a closet disease. We're not living in the 1800s when the aunts or uncles were disabled or alcoholics. They were our family secrets. Shh. Don't want to talk about them. This is 2017. In today's world, some little 5-year-old kid who lives in another country can play the hell out of a set of drums, get 1 million hits on YouTube, be flown to the United States and become an instant celebrity on the Steve Harvey Little Big Shots show, and she's 5 years old. Go figure. Me? I'm 72. My claim to fame is my birthday. It was on February 22nd, which is George Washington's birthday, and my lineage goes back to Alfred the Great, who beheaded anyone who opposed him. Not a lot to brag about there. So, how do you start the conversation that no one wants to talk about? Well, the Hero of the Task Force, and you'll hear today, I'm sure a number of other organizations have resources. In Wisconsin, the 211 number is the instant resource. You can certainly contact the CDC, talk to others, your kids' church, and particularly your co-workers. You are certainly in the industry. I was absolutely amazed by the outpouring of condolences I received at my children's wakes from family and close friends. But from the condolences of another circle of acquaintances, people I knew from work or had met casually who wanted to share their stories, personal stories about their sons or daughters or their extended family members. I had absolutely no idea their lives were turned upside down, none at all, by their own personal tragedies. When I read about the task force from our State Attorney General, Brad Schiller, who declared a war against drugs, I sent him a personal letter and joined the group. He responded with a personal letter of his own, and I got involved. If I can do anything within my power to help save one life, I will consider my time well spent. If I do nothing, I am part of the problem. So I ask you, please, be a hero. Start the conversation. You just don't know whose life you may affect. Thank you for your time and attention.
Unfortunately, Dr. Phil, that is a story, starting with your son, that I've heard so many times. Start people, the athlete, and that continuing slide into addiction is so common to people from middle and upper class families and any families. And then to have a sibling follow in that same path is also, we see it all the time. And what I'm going to first of all, it's so sad. There may be some things we can do as film directors who see this time and time again in our own communities or our states to start the conversation, as he suggested, and to help with this. So I'm going to share with you one thing that we did in Toledo. It's Connie's getting the presentation up.
I didn't break it, remember?
Thank you. And as Dutch said earlier, I'm Keith Walker from Toledo, Ohio, and I want to share with you one thing how do we get this on the screen? Thank God. Okay. But one thing that we set out to do in 2016, in January of that year, we started this. But before I get into that, I want to tell you why we started it. In 2015, I was sitting with our marketing coordinator and talking about something we could do for our community that would do more than just promote our funeral homes, which is what we had been focused on with our marketing dollars forever. We talked about a number of different things, but simultaneously I was seeing a dramatic increase in heroin, specifically related to overdose deaths, from people that you would never imagine their children are involved in that, from kids that were the leaders in their classes, Dr. Phil mentioned, from kids that were just being kids and went down the wrong path one day and ended up at one of our funeral homes. So we thought we could marry those two things that we were trying to do and come up with what I'm going to share with you in a few minutes here. And the hope is that whether you like what we're doing or not, that at least it starts a conversation within our associations at the state level or local district level, or even with you in your own firms, that maybe there's more we can be doing in our own communities across the country that might be able to start to help this thing a little bit. And I'll share with you the results of what we've done over the last 2 years at the end. It's nowhere near where I want it to be, but some positive things have happened that I hope will help. Let's push this next thing here. Okay, what we did, once we had that conversation, we went and found some partners and talked to the different agencies in town. I'll go through each of these very quickly. The ZEF Center is the largest treatment center in our communities. DART is a drug task force within our local sheriff's department. Team Recovery is a group of recovering addicts that have found, as we heard the doctor talk about earlier, that it is a community problem. That in order for them to recover, they need to be there to support each other and keep them accountable and keep them supported and have their own community. A Renewed Mind is another recovery center. Obviously, there's a television station, our billboard company, radio stations, newspapers, social media, and chambers. Getting there with those groups gave us the horsepower to really make this impactful. I'll start with this. This was the first series of billboards we did. And we did billboards, print, and TV, and radio. It's a pretty graphic image. The point of this is to try to educate the whole community that this is a serious problem and how widespread it is. And then to start a conversation within families and the community. And get rid of the stigma attached to it, because it's way past that, it's epidemic. And then also see if we can have a conversation with the community as to what we can do to start to come up with a solution. And then we also did one more thing to start to have some resources for addicts and their families, but that's not this part. Another one. During the second year, which is 2017, our year, in the fall we had a contest with 8th grade art students to see if they could come up with a new look for this. We thought 8th grade was hopefully a good age to get this, so we get awareness into the schools about what's happening. And they came up with some very, again, graphic images that are huge billboards in our community. You notice that the website changed, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. These were our original print ads. And then the ads that the art students did. But very creative, very graphic, and really get the message across that this is nothing to mess with and that there needs to be something that can come out of this. So after we started this campaign in 2016, we started getting calls at the funeral homes from addicts themselves, as well as family members and friends asking for help. And I knew nothing about heroin, or I knew the centers that are partners with us, and I would just refer them on to them. And we thought there needs to be a better, more immediate way. If there's an addict on the phone with us that wants help now, and we don't get it to them now, they may just decide to use it again. So now with this website, which is what we promote and everything we do with this campaign now, there are links to each of these agencies that can help them, and hopefully it's being helpful in that area. Again, an ad that we used to promote it. And I'm going to kind of go over kind of a review of this. But the helpwithheroin.com is used by the media and the agencies for help for addicts. If they call them, they also refer them there. We've got 4,000 radio commercials on 8 stations, 2,000 television commercials, billboards, newspaper. I've spoken to a number of high schools with a panel situation like this, and the Dental Society, the chambers, professional groups, all of that because we're doing this. And it started the conversation through all these things out in the public now that I think this was the catalyst for that. One thing that I found was that initially the media was very suspect. Why would a funeral home want less deaths? That's the question I get. Well, these are horrible, tragic deaths that are taking a good part of a generation away from us and destroying families. We don't want that. We don't want deaths anyway. We're here because there are deaths. We want to help people get through that as much as we can. So once we got through that, and that, I think the fact that we were funeral homes doing this started all the publicity that we got. The partnership has spent over $600,000, most of that in kind. We've invested the seed money, and then the billboard companies are fantastic. The radio stations, the TV stations, all give us in-kind media to play. We're hoping we will continue this next year. We need to continue this until we see the needle move, which I don't know when that will be. Our deaths are still increasing in Northwest Ohio. But what's changed is there's much less stigma. There's much more known where the support is. People can get out there and get it. And there's a lot more collaboration between all the different agencies, which I really believe this helped to start. So we hope to be investing less as time goes on, and we're running some fundraisers now for this that are starting to help fund it, because we didn't want to have that go on forever. But I hope that it's got the momentum that can keep going. Before I stop, I want to share one more thing with you. When I got into this, I had no idea. I didn't have your experience or your experience. I really had no idea what I was dealing with. Someone suggested that I buy this book. It's called Dreamland by Sam Quinones. And if you're interested at all, this goes back to the start of what happened with Purdue Pharma, the Mexican heroin that was coming over. Everything you want to know about why we are where we are, this is a very good book. So I suggest if you want to learn more, you get this, and they've got a background on this subject. So thank you very much for your attention.
The helpwithheroin.com, is that a local website, or is that something we could?
I think it's all over the place. The only issue is it's got local resources for us, so maybe there's a way we could make that more national.
Okay, thank you.
you? No. I don't want to start anything out. I'll try not to cause any technical difficulties. So, each of us here, as funeral directors, has a story. Each of us has experience with families in many different circumstances, many different types of tragic losses. How many people have had a funeral for someone who died of an opiate overdose? Majority of the room. How many of you had one 5 years ago? Much smaller group. How many have not had any? A couple. They're coming. They're coming. 5 years ago, never saw an overdose. Been working in the funeral home for 35 plus years. There was an occasional drug-related death that may have been from cocaine or something like that, but never really saw an overdose. My firm's in a suburban community outside of Buffalo, do about 130 calls a year, and 2 years ago, things changed, and I remember the exact day it changed. It was Thanksgiving Day, 2015. I was sitting with my family, enjoying a holiday with the family, sitting around, eating turkey, feeling exhausted from the tryptophan. And we were sharing stories about what's going on in everybody's lives, trying to catch up with what's going on. And like many of us here today, I received a call. We had another death. This one was a little unusual for me. It was my brother's best friend. He stood up at my brother's wedding. My brother stood up as his best man in his wedding. And he was uncontrollably crying. He lost his son. Son died of a heroin overdose. He filled me in to tell me that they had recognized he had a problem, that he was having one last Thanksgiving, and he was going to start his treatment the next day. After lunch, he decides to go take a nap. His mother goes to call him for dinner, and she finds him dead in his room. She is inconsolable. She is struggling. She will never be the same. The father's trying to make a difference, but the mother's devastated to the point where she can't even socially interact with people anymore. That was interesting for that funeral. Crowds were immense. We had people lined up around the door, around the funeral home. People were standing in line because the family was a good family. The kids were involved with hockey. They were involved with travel teams. They went all over the country. The father was very involved in the community, had a business. Everybody knew them. Everybody respected this family. It was a wonderful family. And oh, by the way, we had one extra visitor that we weren't quite expecting. The drug dealer was in the line for the procession. The police had reached out to us, contacted us, asked us if they could send some plainclothes officers, and they arrested him in the middle of my funeral home while he was in line to pay his respects. The following Easter, one of my son's best friends' mother calls me. He had just got out of jail because we knew he had an addiction, and he was robbing whatever he could to feed that addiction. And he was home, and he got back to hanging around with his friends. When he was little, my son and him were inseparable, but as time grew, they grew separate. But it still was devastating to my son. He still lost somebody that he couldn't understand why they died. As we're going through that, again, huge crowds lining around the building. We had a different problem. there were kids showing up at the funeral who were also at that moment on the drugs. We had a kid walk in, and I'm gonna be a little bit graphic, but I think it'll illustrate the point. Walks into the funeral home, stands in line, pays his respects to the family, goes up to the casket, and we thought originally that he headbutted him. But it turns out it's something called the heroin nod. What the heroin nod is, and if you Google that, you'll see videos of it on YouTube. They're solid from the waist down. They can stand up. They have balance there, but they're uncontrollable from basically the waist up. And he kind of went down, hit his head on the deceased head. The mother grabbed him right away and escorted him. Then his uncles grabbed him and walked him outside. And it was pretty traumatic for the family. They were kind of disappointed that someone would show up using drugs when their son just died an overdose. But it was his friend, and he wanted to pay his respects. I don't necessarily fault him for that. Then he goes outside to his car with his girlfriend, and he goes in the car and he shoots up again in the parking lot of the funeral home. Because of the large crowds, I had extra staff working that day, and we had one of our attendants out in the parking lot, and he happened to be fire chief of a local fire company, so it was a good thing he was there. He immediately saw the problem, heard what was happening, called the police. Police were able to get there, administer Narcan immediately, and we saved this young man's life. That got to the news. The news heard about the story. They asked me about it. So I talked to the young man who died's mother, and she agreed to be interviewed because she wanted to save whatever life. If she just reached one more kid who was on this drug, that would be worth any criticism or any publicity that she would receive, because it wasn't about her, never was about her, it was about saving these lives. So the Buffalo News does a big front page article, half the front page, talks about this situation, but also opens the door for a conversation about heroin addiction and the overdoses. When that happened, the backlash on their website was relentless. People were attacking the young man who died, calling him a junkie and a drug addict. They attacked his family for not being a good family. That was so untrue. They attacked me as the funeral director because all I cared about was the almighty dollar, and I didn't cry when I was going to the bank. So how much could I really care about that young man and his family? I got hammered in every way possible. I give the Buffalo News credit. They took the feed down and no longer allowed anyone to make comments on that article. I went from no overdoses to averaging one a month to now averaging between 1 and 2 a week. Last month alone, on a 130-call funeral home, I had 5 overdoses and 3 suicides. And I can probably bet you that those suicides were related to some degree to the drugs. That's 8 in 1 month. I was in the lighter pink shaded area. I guarantee you, we're getting there towards the darker red. And if you don't think it's happening everywhere. Well, that news article actually opened up a whole nother world for me. I was sought out by people in our community that were involved with the heroin overdoses who's lost children. They have a close Facebook group in area called Western New York Still Standing. That actually led to me sending the majority of our staff at our funeral home to get Narcan training through our county, which then led to me being appointed to the Erie County Opioid Task Force. And their mission initially was just to bring education and try to stop this overdose increase and try to help the survivors. But there's the people in the middle, the people that care for those people, and not just the funeral directors, the nurses, the doctors, and the funeral directors, caseworkers. We're trying to help these families and don't seem to be having much success. One of the women that I was working with, she says to me, I feel like I no longer have an anchor in this world. The grief that you're dealing with when you're handling these families is grief on a level that has only thing that can be compared to is suicide. And I'll even say it's worse. And it's worse in this sense that these families in a lot of cases have been trying to help their children. They've been doing everything they can. Most of the time they had them in some type of a rehab program. They've tried to do things that they could, but there's no beds. There's not enough places for these people. And the programs that are available, at least in our area, are not the appropriate programs. They're not the programs that Doctor talked about earlier. So expect large crowds, expect police involvement. For one of the cases, the police just wanted to come and try to get the fingerprint off the deceased so they could open his phone so they could continue their investigation. You're dealing with grief on another level. You're dealing with grief where I don't know if there's ever any consolation for these families. The families that try to make a difference, like Dr. Phil, they maybe at least have something that they can focus their energies on. But many of these families are so devastated, they no longer can function. But there's also a threat to the funeral director on a couple different levels. First, the emotional toll that it takes. Let me tell you, by the time I got to number 7 last month, before I pulled into my driveway, I sat in my car. When I pulled in my driveway, I sat in my car because I didn't want to bring the frustration, the grief, the anxiety, and the stress that I was having into the house. So I sat there and I cried for 10 minutes. I'm burying my kids' friends. I'm burying my friends' kids, excuse me, I'm just upset. I'm burying my friends' kids. All these people that you're dealing with, how many of you would say, I know most of the people that come through my funeral home. Almost every single one of you. You're friends with most of them. Almost every single one of you. I know you are, because I am. And these people you're caring for are your friends' children. The emotional toll on us is tremendous. We need to have help available to us as funeral directors. Sometimes we just go through the days and dealing with these things and handling them over and over because we've built up maybe a tolerance to it, not realizing that at some point we can crack too. And it happened to one of my funeral directors this past week. She had lost her brother when she was 16 to a suicide, and this has devastated her to the point where she's leaving the industry. She can't handle it. It was too much. 8 in 1 month was too much. But there's also a physical threat to the funeral director. These drugs are so potent. So heroin is 20 times more potent than morphine. Fentanyl, maybe 100 times more potent than morphine. Fentanyl, so you know what that drug is, that's what's the anesthesia drug that you take when you go under surgery. Carfentanil, 100 times more potent than that. Do you know what that's used for? That's an elephant tranquilizer. That's what carfentanil is. This stuff is so potent. It happened in Ohio to a police officer. He was on a crime scene. He had his gloves on. And by the way, for the gloves you should use, nitrile. Now I know certain chemicals that used in the embalming room dissolve the nitrile. So in that case you might want a double glove, nitrile underneath with latex on top. But nitrile gloves are impervious. Latex gloves are somewhat permeable. Anyway, police officer has nitrile gloves on. He's cleaning things up. He accidentally touches his shirt while his gloves are on. Takes off his gloves after the end of the crime scene, goes back to the precinct. Somebody goes, hey, you got a little white spot on your shirt. Takes his hand, goes, brushes it off. Overdosed and died immediately. That was carfentanil. 1 grain. That's how potent that stuff is, right through your skin. The stuff is so strong they no longer need to dissolve it and inject it. They can snort it, they can place it on tampons and put it in a moist area. There's all kinds of ways they're using it, and it's not what you see. You don't see the tracks anymore that you were used to seeing. So as a funeral director, we advise our team, if we have an overdose, not to touch the clothes. I advise the families to be careful when they're cleaning their rooms, to please use glove and a mask. Mask is very important because one of your threats is if it does become airborne and you breathe it in, that's when you're at high risk. So when you're handling these cases, we advise our funeral directors to not take the clothes out. If we got the clothes, make sure they're wearing a mask. Hose the body down immediately to wash off any residue that might be with them, and to please use universal precautions at all times. But I also make the same advice to the families. Go into their room with precautions. Use the same universal precautions that the funeral director uses, and be careful, because you don't know. Now, I haven't seen a case of that happening. I know it hasn't, but you never know that it's going to happen. So with my journey of this, and being involved with OGR, I'm the current president, we did a webinar to educate people on the heroin overdose and how it takes place. That 75% of the deaths in our county started through prescription drugs, whether it was they took them from their house or whatever. I don't recommend flushing them down the toilet because you don't want them in your water system. But our police stations throughout our county have all drug receptacles where they will dispose and destroy the drugs through protect their means. So talk to your police departments, see if they have those receptacles to deposit the drugs. Don't keep them in the house. I recently had a minor surgery and my doctor gave me 50 hydrocodone. I asked him, why are you giving me so many? He goes, oh, they're not addictive. He's laughing over here. I brought him to the Commissioner of the Department of Health for Erie County at one of our task force meetings. He said, if you'd taken all those, you would have had an addiction problem. One of the addiction problems that you will be facing more and more frequently is seniors. Because they take a prescription that the doctor gives them, thinking that that's what they're supposed to do. And if they're feeling a little bit of pain more than it's not working for them, they take the maximum dosage. And now we are starting to see seniors who are fighting and battling the addiction as well. That's also up and coming. So our first presentation that we did a webinar was on the history and how the addiction works. And it's not like an addiction like any other one. You have two main components. You have physical and psychological. This one is a third. There's a change in the body, because as the opiates fill in the pain receptors, your brain goes, oh, wait a second, they're not working. We need to create new ones. So your body's pretty crazy, smart. It creates new pain receptors. So then you take more opiates. That's why they need these stronger drugs, to fill these pain receptors, although they also build tolerance. But when you come off the drugs and you detox, those pain receptors don't go away. You have a whole nother level of an addiction that no other addiction has. So OGR had got back to me and said, wait a second, we need to do something to help the funeral directors. So I worked with them and we put together a webinar, which was the culmination of this book that we gave each one of you, on how the funeral directors should handle this opiate crisis. This is really pretty encompassing. It's very helpful. And I think, please, bring this back to your staff. Make them read it. Help them to understand the risks and the challenges that the funeral industry has with this topic. So thank you.
We have one more round of applause.